But first, our top story. In the latest developments in the Arushi Talwar murder case.
What we are being told is at this moment the big breaking news. The end of 5.5 years, Arushi Talwar.
He was put through a lie detector test, and sources in the CBI say he was deceptive during that test.
So much of interest, and yet there's so much misinformation as well.
I'm not going to answer any questions. I've come to give a statement. If it's fine with you, I'll give a statement. If it's not fine, then we can.
This is a story that has been making headlines,
where it's clear that the investigation was a complete mockery of justice.
Do you still stand by what you said?
Absolutely.
The city of Noida is what is known as a planned city, and it can be found in India's northern state of Uttar Pradesh. A planned city, community or town is any community that was carefully planned from its inception and is typically constructed on previously undeveloped land. Noida sits around 16 miles east of New Delhi, and over the years has become a hub for software companies and mobile app development, with companies such as Microsoft, Samsung and Barclays working from there. It is also a popular place for creative media, with titans like T-Series, Z News and India TV being based there too. In 2008 it was home to the Talwar family, 13-year-old Arushi Talwar and her parents, Rajesh and Nupur. Arushi was described as clever and studious, friendly but also quite shy. After 5 years of IVF treatment and their hopes of one day having a baby girl, Arushi was born, and her mother Nupur described her as sunshine in their lives. As a family, they loved travelling together, going all over the world, with Arushi documenting everything. She was an only child and had a close group of friends, who would call themselves the Awesome Foursome. She was enrolled at Delhi Public School and worked hard in all her studies. Her friends said it took her a while to open up with people, but when she did, she was fun and loved to joke around, and she had dreams of being famous one day. Arushi was the one everyone wanted to be friends with. She was always positive and had a calming nature. One of Arushi's best friends, Fizza, said they loved taking photos of everything they did and everywhere they went, and they would turn these photos into collages to go on their bedroom walls. Arushi was about to turn 14 and had been excitedly planning her birthday party with her friends. She lived in a second-floor apartment in Noida's Sector 25 with her parents. The Talwars had several people that worked in the home as domestic help, one of which was 45-year-old Hemraj Banjard. He also lived in the apartment. Originally from the Darapani village in the Gandaki zone of northern Nepal, Hemraj's family always struggled to get by, and he started working in India to support them, sending his wife between 4,000 and 6,000 rupees a month, the equivalent of $50 to $80. He would travel back home a couple of times a year and stay for a short while before returning to work. The family's apartment was located in Jalvayu Vihar, a sprawling complex of many other apartments. The Talwars' home was 1,300 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, a drawing dining room and a quarter for their domestic help, which is where Hemraj slept. The entrance to the apartment had 3 doors, the outermost gate, the middle grille door and the innermost wooden door. Hemraj's room had 2 doors. One door opened inside the apartment, and the other door was located between the 2 grille doors. Rajesh and Nupur slept in the master bedroom, while Arushi slept in the adjacent room, around 8 feet away. The Talwars were a powerful and successful family, and, by all accounts, lived a very good life. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were doctors and headed the dental department at Fortis Hospital, whilst also practicing at a clinic in Sector 27, which they shared with close friends, Anita and Praful Durrani. Rajesh taught at the ITS Dental College as well, and the couple were always very busy. Fizza said that although Arushi's parents were often working, they had a close and honest relationship with their daughter, trusting her to make the right choices about where she went and who she hung out with. Nupur went to work at the couple's clinic between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Half an hour later, she picked Arushi up from school and they headed back to their apartment. They ate lunch at home with Rajesh's brother's wife Vandana. Nupur then went to do her shift at the Fortis Hospital, which started at 4:30 p.m. before ending at 7. She returned to the apartment at 7:30 p.m. Rajesh had been teaching since 8:45 a.m. and finished his day at the clinic at 8:30 p.m. before his driver, Umesh Sharma, dropped him back at the apartment at 9:30 p.m. Umesh then went to park the car at Nupur's parents' home, as the Talwars didn't have a garage. Around 10 minutes later, Umesh returned to give the keys back to Rajesh. Umesh saw Nupur and Arushi sat at the dining table, as well as Rajesh and Hemraj too. Hemraj had cooked dinner for everyone, and after Umesh left, the family sat down to eat. Rajesh and Nupur said that after dinner, they gave Arushi an early birthday present. The 13-year-old loved taking photos, and the gift was aptly chosen: a new Sony digital camera. They took a few pictures together as a family, and Arushi took some of herself, with the last photo being taken at 10:10. After they finished, the family started to wind down and get ready for bed at around 11 p.m. The landline was located in Rajesh and Nupur's bedroom, and a short time after 11, Rajesh answered a landline call that came from the United States. Rajesh then asked Nupur to turn on the internet router, which was located in Arushi's bedroom. Nupur said her daughter was reading a book when she went in called The 3 Mistakes of My Life. Everything appeared fine. Rajesh browsed some stock and dentistry sites before catching up on his emails. The last email was sent at 11:57 p.m. He said after this, he went to sleep. Around the same time, a boy named Anmol was trying to get hold of Arushi. Many reports state they were good friends, but her friend Fizza said he was actually her boyfriend. When Arushi didn't respond at around 11:30 p.m, Anmol called the landline. This call also went unanswered, which seemed odd as it had just been answered not long earlier. He phoned the landline again about half an hour later, but it also rang out. Arushi stayed up quite late talking to her friends on the phone, and the lack of response from anyone inside the home was odd. Anmol sent Arushi a text at 12:30 a.m, but the message would never be received by her phone, as it would turn out that her phone had been inactive since 9:10 p.m. The family's new housemaid Bharti Mandal rang the doorbell ready to start work for the day. She was usually let inside by Hemraj, but he didn't come to the door. She rang the bell a few more times, and then said she tried pushing the door, but said it didn't open either. Nupur soon opened the innermost door, and the pair spoke through the middle grill door. Bharti said, "I rang the doorbell twice, but the door was not opened. I tried to push it, but it did not open. Auntie came near the wooden door inside. She told me that Hemraj must have gone out to fetch milk and locked the door from the outside." Nupur asked Bharti to wait until he came back, but Bharti was keen to get in and start working and asked Nupur to give her the keys. Bharti went back downstairs and Nupur went to the balcony. She said to Bharti that perhaps the door wasn't locked and was just on the latch, and asked her to check it again. Bharti told her to throw the keys anyway, as if it was locked, it would save her going up and down the stairs twice. Nupur threw the keys to her. Bharti recalled, "When I got back to the main grill door, it opened without the key. I then opened the latch on the second grill door, which is adjacent to the wooden door, and went inside." Which of the doors Bharti was initially referring to remains a point of confusion, and these inconsistencies would be reflected in later statements. Hemraj being absent struck her as very odd. Rajesh and Napur often slept in due to their late shifts, and it was always Hemraj's job to let people into the home. Napur said she rang Hemraj's mobile, but it was swiftly cut off after only a few rings. She hung up and rang again, but this time it appeared the phone had been turned off. While Bharti was letting herself into the apartment, Rajesh was also up and awake. He said he went into the living room area and saw a nearly empty bottle of whiskey covered in blood on the dining table. He asked Napur to check Arushi's room straight away. Arushi had a bathroom just off of her bedroom, and her bedroom door would stay locked at night. It was a self-locking door that could only be opened from the inside or from the outside with a key. The keys were usually left on Napur's bedside table, but this morning, her door was unlocked. Napur later said she couldn't actually remember if she had locked it that night or not. When Bharti walked into the home, she realised something was very wrong. Rajesh was crying and led Bharti into Arushi's room, shouting, "Look what Hemraj has done." Napur was crying silently, seemingly in shock. Arushi Talwar was lying in a pool of blood, covered by a blanket, with her school bag over her face. Despite Bharti running to the neighbours for help, nothing could be done. Arushi had been dead for some time. Her throat had been slit and she had been bludgeoned with something. She had an injury on her forehead just above her left eye. This blow to the head had caused a deep cut and resulted in a blood clot in her brain. Sometime after 7:30 a.m, the police arrived at the property and were met with a crowd of 15 people in the living room. More people were in the master bedroom, and the media were even allowed inside too. It was clear the crime scene was already very contaminated. Authorities set about gathering evidence as best they could. But despite them lifting almost 30 fingerprints from around the home, most of the prints were smudged and therefore couldn't be used as evidence. The crime scene also appeared to show that an attempt had been made to clean up. It would later turn out that the Talwars instructed their domestic help to clean the floor and walls of Arushi's bedroom while the police were still inside the home, something not many could make sense of. There were bloodstains on the handle of the terrace door and blood drops leading there. The terrace door was locked. Nothing had been stolen, there were no signs of a forced entry, and the police said the crime appeared to have been committed purely out of rage. An expert who first inspected the scene said that the evidence pointed towards the murders being committed by somebody very close to Arushi. It appeared to be an inside job, the expert said. Jalvayu Vihar has 6 security guards that supervised it, and all of them stated they had not seen anyone visiting or leaving the Talwars' house that night. However, the complex had 1,886 apartments at the time, with nearly 10,000 people living there, so keeping track of everyone coming and going, especially late at night, would be very hard. A post-mortem was performed at around 8:30 a.m. Dr. Dohre wrote the report and checked to see if there was any evidence to suggest that Arushi had been sexually assaulted. He initially noted that nothing abnormal could be found regarding her genital area, and no semen was found at the scene. But the sample that was sent away was later suspected to have been tampered with. Later on, Dr. Dohre said that her vaginal area was extraordinarily dilated. He noted that the dilation could have been caused by someone manipulating her body while rigor mortis was setting in. Arushi's pyjama bottoms appeared to have been pulled up or pulled down, and her rear was exposed, and there was evidence that her vaginal area had also been cleaned, for reasons unconfirmed. Rajesh and Napur were adamant that there was only one person police officers should be looking for, Hemraj Banjad. Police asked the couple how they didn't hear anything, being just metres away from their daughter's room, but they said they heard nothing. Their door was closed and their air conditioning unit was loud and must have blocked out any noise. A sound test was later conducted, recreating a similar situation, and the report stated No sound was heard in the bedroom by either of the persons. Police also suspected Hemraj and had to conduct a search of the property to make sure he wasn't hiding anywhere. But when they tried to open the door that led them out to the terrace, Rajesh stopped them. Instead, he offered them 25,000 rupees to go out into the streets and find him, believing he was long gone and now on the run. Sources say that the terrace door was never locked until that day, so this in itself seemed odd. Failure to get the terrace door keys meant that the terrace would be inaccessible for an entire day. Everyone was now on the hunt to find Hemraj. Police issued several statements and appeals, hoping to locate him. The police's initial theory, that he had entered Arushi's room in an inebriated state after drinking from the whiskey bottle found on the table, and had either attempted to, or managed to, sexually assault her. When she resisted, he killed her. Police thought he might have slit her throat with a kukri, a native Nepalese knife, but those that knew Hemraj said he was teetotal, so this raised questions too. There was blood found on Arushi's pillow, bed, walls, floor, and the front side of her bedroom door. However, there was no blood on her toys, her school bag, the book she was reading before she was killed, or her pink pillow kept on the back of her bed. This indicated that they were placed on the bed after the murder had occurred. A part of Arushi's mattress was cut out and sent for analysis along with her pillow, bed sheets and clothes. One of Rajesh's employees, Vikas, later admitted he, along with 3 others, attempted to dump the remaining part of her mattress on the terrace, but couldn't because it was still locked. Someone then suggested he throw the mattress onto a neighbouring terrace, which they did. While on the neighbouring terrace, no one appeared to notice anything on top of the Talwars terrace. At around 1 p.m, Arushi's body was brought back home after the autopsy had been completed. She was placed on ice slabs. More friends and family gathered at the house for a worship ritual known as a puja. The puja can be performed in a variety of settings and for many different occasions. It may honour or celebrate the presence of special guests or a loved one's memory after their passing. Her best friend Fizza also arrived at the house to pay her respects. She described Rajesh as almost delirious, shouting and crying and repeating over and over, "Look at what they have done to your friend." They moved freely about the home, all the while trying to avoid the blood. Fizza said as scared as she was, she needed to see Arushi for closure. The friends sat down near her body and did their best to say their goodbyes. Fizza couldn't fathom how this had happened. She said, "Arushi had come to my house a day before her death, excited, jumping, bubbly, but she had a bad cold. We were working on a school project together. She was extremely excited about the weekend and her birthday party. She was going to have a sleepover. I spoke to her on the phone the evening before. Everything seemed normal." She also said that the prospect of Hemraj committing the crime was shocking and confusing. He was well trusted by the family and kept to himself while he worked. It was completely out of left field. Later that day, Arushi would be cremated. Many would accuse the Talwars of being in a rush to cremate their daughter, but her body was decomposing fast. Family and friends were already travelling to pay their respects, and the police said they didn't need to examine her body further. Dinesh Talwar, Rajesh's brother, said many people he knew were brought up in a way where you didn't really show emotion, you just got on with things. Just because the couple were not crying in public didn't mean they did not care, he said. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar left for Haridwar to immerse Arushi's ashes in the Ganges River. Back in Noida, the police were still looking for Hemraj, but that search would soon come to an abrupt and shocking end. The retired Deputy Superintendent of Police, KK Gautam, who knew the family, arrived at the home to pay his respects. Noticing the same blood spots on the stairs that the others had done, he called the police team and asked why the terrace door was still locked, believing this could have been where the murder weapon had been hidden. They quickly arrived back at the building. "How did you not notice these bloodstains? Did you not go onto the terrace?" Gautam asked. The superintendent said he couldn't get hold of the keys, but he soon fell silent when Gautam explained he could have just broken the lock and forced his way out. The team eventually did just that, getting onto the terrace at about 10:30 a.m. Hemraj Banjard's body was discovered in what was an advanced state of putrefaction, further exacerbated by the hot summer weather. On top of him was a water panel, a panel that would never be taken into evidence. His throat had been slit in exactly the same way as Arushi's, and he had been hit on the back of the head by what appeared to be the same blunt object. Blood covered the terrace and terrace door, and behind his body was a trail that indicated he had been dragged there. Rajesh and Nupur were called back to their home. Rajesh was asked to come out onto the terrace to identify his body, but he said he couldn't be sure because of the decomposition and injuries. A friend of Hemraj would soon formally identify the 45-year-old. The keys to the terrace door would never be found. The Talwars said this key was on a set that belonged to Hemraj, but the whole set would remain missing. A partial male DNA profile was found on the gate leading to the terrace, but was never analysed. A bloody palm print could be seen on the wall, as could a bloody shoe print on the ground. As police took Hemraj's body down, KK Gautam recalled how haphazard and messy this all was. His blood was going everywhere, and little was done to keep the rest of the area as clean as possible. Hemraj's post-mortem showed that he had not eaten dinner that night, even though there was a plate of food prepped for him in the kitchen, and his bed was still made, indicating he hadn't gone to sleep that night. It was also confirmed that none of Hemraj's DNA was found inside Arushi's bedroom. Authorities now had 2 murders to focus on, and the media were covering it intensely and relentlessly. The police initially detained several people linked to Hemraj, but nothing came of this, and they were released shortly after. Anmol, who had made the calls to Arushi that night, was also questioned. The pair had had hundreds of exchanges over the previous weeks, and the police hoped he could paint a clearer picture about Arushi's life and state of mind at the time. Anmol admitted to having a small fight with Arushi that night, and said it was likely why her phone had been turned off since 9:10 p.m. During their conversation, Arushi confided in Anmol that she wasn't seeing eye to eye with her father. Having always had a trusting relationship with her parents, she felt in the last 2 weeks that had changed for some reason, but didn't know why. Rajesh and Nupur had a liquor cabinet in the home, which was well hidden behind a wooden panel. The whiskey bottle that had been found on the table was confirmed to have blood of both Hemraj and Arushi on it, but no further DNA or fingerprints were found. This appeared to indicate to police that whoever had taken the bottle had to have known the property well enough that this, in their eyes, ruled out an outside intruder. Sadly, however, because the police failed to collect any proper samples from it, it was impossible to determine anything else. Looking at the timeline and state of the bodies when they were found, experts and police believe that Arushi and Hemraj were both killed sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. Both were hit with the same blunt object first, and their throats were slit afterwards. Because the blood had drained from Arushi's neck, as opposed to spurting out, this also confirmed that her throat was slit after she had been hit on the head. But apart from the bodies, the police actually had little to go on. An estimated 90% of all evidence was destroyed or contaminated during the investigation. One reporter recalled laughing and watching in shock as a police officer attempted to examine the bloody handprint on the wall of the terrace, a handprint that could have been vital. The reporter said that by this point, that same handprint had been touched by about 50 people, so trying to analyse it now was totally pointless. The media, keen to get the latest scoop, were frequently inside the building, often touching and therefore tampering with things they shouldn't have been. Arushi's new camera had 5 photographs on it, numbered 13, 15, 20, 22 and 23. This indicated that at least 23 photographs had been taken and 18 had been deleted. What those photos were and who deleted them remains unknown. Looking at the photos that had been taken on Arushi's camera, police could see what clothes Rajesh and Nupur were wearing that night, and they were taken in for examination. The blood of Arushi was found on Rajesh's clothing, something which could have come from being in the room after she was found, sources said. but Hemraj's blood was not found. No blood was found on Nopor's clothing. The police said that another big piece of evidence was the fact the internet router had seemingly been turned off at 3:43 a.m. An expert said this could only have been done as a result of a power cut or someone manually turning it off. And with no recorded power cuts in the area, it could only have been the other option. Police already felt strongly that both Arushi and Hemraj's time of death was hours before 3:43 a.m, so this excluded either of them being the ones to turn it off. This revelation could only point authorities in two directions. Either whoever had gone in to turn it off, for some unknown reason, didn't see Arushi, which seemed almost impossible, or they were the one responsible for her murder. But further analysis down the line would later confirm that the router had in fact gone on and off several times throughout the early morning and into the next day, while the police were there, undermining the theories. Phone records showed that between the hours of 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on May 16th, while Arushi's autopsy report was being written up, several calls were going back and forth. Rajesh's brother Dinesh, the chairman of the Noida Eye Hospital's Sushil Chowdhury, the retired Deputy Superintendent of Police KK Gautam, and someone else, who remains unidentified, all began to communicate. Dinesh phoned Sushil Chowdhury, who then called KK Gautam. After this, KK Gautam would call the unidentified number. This cycle would repeat a number of times. Dr. Sushil Chowdhury called me on my phone around 12 noon and told me his friend Dinesh Talwar's niece had been murdered and her body had been sent for a post-mortem. He asked me to help expedite the post-mortem and to make sure that rape was not mentioned in the report, to which I replied it was not in my power. Looking at Nopor's phone, it was unusually switched off between May 15th and May 18th. Records showed this phone had not once been switched off in the previous 60 days. As Hemraj was no longer a suspect, the police named the Talwars' former domestic help, Vishnu Sharma, as the new suspect. Vishnu had worked for the Talwars for 10 years. When he left for a holiday, he introduced Hemraj to the family as his replacement. When he returned, he found himself out of a job, as the Talwars wanted to keep Hemraj instead. The police wondered if he had killed Hemraj and Arushi as a way to get back at Rajesh and Nopor, but it was later confirmed that he was in Nepal on the day of the murders, and thus he was exonerated. The fingers were now pointing at the only other known people in the home, Rajesh and Nopor Talwar. There were several theories put forward as to how Rajesh and Nopor could have been involved in the murders. The first theory was that Hemraj and Arushi had engaged in some kind of sexual activity. The police said this could have been consensual or not. Rajesh had found out and taken his daughter's life in a so-called honour killing and murdered Hemraj as well. It is important to note that although the police have stated it could have been consensual, the age of consent in India is 18 years old. Arushi was a child, and any sexual activity would have been illegal. Hemraj's wife, however, said that her husband had treated Arushi like his own daughter and would never have hurt her in any way. Another theory was that Rajesh had been having an affair and was confronted by his daughter and blackmailed by Hemraj. Rajesh had a dental assistant named Krishna Tadarai, who was also friends with Hemraj, and it was later claimed that he was the one who had planted both of these theories. A few days before the murders, Rajesh admitted to reprimanding Krishna over his work. Perhaps people thought this is why the theories had been planted. Authorities said they now officially suspected the crimes as being a case of an honour killing. Dr. Rajesh Talwar was placed under arrest for both murders. The Talwar family refuted all the allegations and said that this was a case of the police deflecting in an attempt to cover up how badly the investigation had been handled. They said Rajesh and Nopor were a very progressive and forward-thinking couple, and this wasn't in any capacity what they believed in. The former senior editor of English Weekly, Shoma Chowdhury, commented on the cultural differences between the Talwars and the Noida police, saying the police leapt to the theory of an honour killing because they couldn't understand the way the Talwars lived their lives, calling it a cultural collision. The Talwar family was very much an urban, cosmopolitan, professional family, whereas the Noida police came from a much more conservative cultural background, and for them, the idea of a girl who's allowed this kind of life, who had messages from boyfriends, just that basic family dynamic, was not something they could understand at all, she said. The police announced this new development at a fairly poorly put together press conference, where the Inspector General of Police would even misname Arushi several times.
शारुती तलवार और हेमराज का कत्ल हुआ 16 तारीख में सुबह पुलिस को खबर दी गई कि श्रुति का कत्ल हुआ है Yes, please. श्रुति की हत्या की गई है आरुषि की आरुषि की हत्या
They outlined their theories. Either Rajesh had killed his daughter and Hemraj after finding them together, or they had both become caught up in his affair and he had killed them to keep his secret.
कि डॉक्टर राजेश के एक्स्ट्रा मैरिटल अफेयर थे.
Authorities also pointed back to a previous statement that Rajesh had made, where he referred to Hemraj in the past tense on May 16th, a day before his body was found, and, according to sources, Hemraj confided in some friends that he was scared his life was in danger because the Talwars suspected him of leaking their family secrets. But Nupur Talwar would also soon find herself detained. Opinion was split, with a lot of the public turning against the Talwars, including the hospital who fired Rajesh immediately. But many others knew how badly the police had handled this, and how deeply corruption within these sectors could run. At the request of Rajesh and Nupur, the Central Bureau of Investigation was handed the case by Noida police. The CBI initially believed the parents' innocence, and announced they had 3 new suspects. The Talwars' assistant Krishna Thadarai and 2 other servants, Rajkumar Sharma and Vijay Mandal. They were now being investigated and Krishna was placed under arrest.
Earlier in the day, the CBI had picked up Dr. Rajesh Talwar's compounder, Krishna, for questioning. He was put through a lie detector test, and sources in the CBI say he was deceptive during that test. Krishna worked at Dr. Talwar's clinic and was the one who said that the domestic help Hemraj had told him that there was a threat to his life.
It's believed to have that the CBI team have got some sort of headway in the investigations, and which is why they have come here. Also, right now, the primary thing for the CBI is to get the sequence of the event constructed, which the CBI team doesn't seem to be having right now, as tomorrow is another important day.
On June 13th, the search of Krishna's apartment began. The 3 men were subjected to what is known as a narco test. A narco test involves the injection of sodium pentothal, commonly referred to as truth serum. This induces a hypnotic or sedated state. While a narco test may have some validity, it is not totally admissible in court. While under the drug, Krishna, Rajkumar and Vijay all gave varying accounts, often changing their individual statements several times over. During Krishna's test, he hazily gave vague descriptions of places and people, but he did mention a kukri, the terrace, and even said he was the one to kill Hemraj. He named other people being at the scene as well, and spoke about their parts in the murders. But he then went on to say he hadn't committed the crime at all, and the police had been asking him to take the rap since the start.
किसके पास है? हे कृष्णा, हेमराज का मोबाइल किसके पास है? हेमराज का मोबाइल किसके पास है? किसके पास है बोल?
वो है सचिन साहब.
किसके पास है?
Nonetheless, Krishna said enough for the CBI to, at least on some level, believe there was a level of legitimacy to what he was talking about. The CBI now felt that the men may have been let in by Hemraj, hence they found no forced entry, and an attempted sexual assault had been made on Arushi before Hemraj intervened and the pair ended up dead. Many others understandably questioned the validity of these confessions and said the police and CBI were just desperate to pin the double murder on someone and had chosen 3 people who didn't have the means or finances to defend themselves. Upon searching Krishna's apartment, initial reports stated that officers had seized a purple pillowcase, along with a kukri. While the kukri was found to have blood on it, it was not human blood. A report stated that the presence of Hemraj's DNA was confirmed to have been found on the purple pillow cover, but later on, the CBI said this was an error. They said they had mixed up Krishna and Hemraj on the report sheet, and the pillowcase, said to have come from Krishna's room, had actually come from Hemraj's room instead. Both Rajesh and Nupur were given lie detector tests, which came back as inconclusive. A second set of tests did not find any evidence of deception. At this point, Rajesh, Krishna, Rajkumar and Vijay were all in custody, but the CBI were keeping very quiet on what was going on. In July, after 50 days in prison, Rajesh was allowed bail and headed home. He stated that while in prison he was faced with police threats, trying to force him into signing confessions, which he never did. The CBI then handed over the investigation to a new part of the team, which initially recommended closing the case due to what they called critical gaps. But after looking into it more, the new team continued on. They now felt that the murder weapons were possibly a surgical blade and Rajesh's golf club. Forensic experts concluded that the dimensions of the golf club matched the size of the wounds on both Arushi and Hemraj's heads, although no examination of any golf club was carried out for almost a year, by which point any DNA the CBI thought it might have was long gone. The Talwar family, in fact, said they requested to have various testing done, including touch DNA. They asked the CBI to examine everything from kitchen utensils to the golf clubs in question, but these tests were not carried out, and even if they were, the contamination was likely too great to determine anything. Krishna, Rajkumar and Vijay were all released. Their alibis had checked out, and the police said they could find no hard evidence against them. Any alleged confessions contained too many inconsistencies and could not be relied upon. No fingerprints or DNA belonging to any of the men could be found inside the apartment, and there was no evidence of any physical or phone-based interactions between them. Krishna's family and his landlord stated he was at his house on the night in question. Vijay Mandal's employer told investigators he was at his garage. Anita Durrani, who shared the clinic with Rajesh and Nupur, was Rajkumar's employer. She stated he was present in her house until at least 12:30 a.m. Police couldn't even find a strong enough link between the 3 men. Rajkumar reiterated this and said he didn't even know either of them. It all seemed highly unlikely to investigators that they could have got into the home and committed the crimes, all without Rajesh and Nupur or any of the neighbours seeing or hearing them. After his release, Vijay Mandal accused the CBI of physical force and threats. He insisted that the charges against all 3 were just an attempt to frame them, echoing what Krishna and Rajkumar had said. "15 months had now passed since the murders, and a huge discovery was made on a dirt track. Arushi's mobile phone, that had been missing since the investigation started, was finally located. It had been completely erased. Hemraj's mobile phone would never be found. The CBI had no other new suspects, and said they were now focused solely on the Talwars. They believed their evidence was mounting up, and that their theories could be backed up by various findings. The refusal to provide the terrace door keys, the hidden liquor cabinet behind the panel that had been opened, would not have been known to an outsider or intruder. The seeming lack of emotion displayed, the time it took to phone the police, and the fact that they were just feet away from Arushi's room and heard nothing. The thoughts that the murder weapons were either a surgical blade or one of Rajesh's golf clubs. The internet router activity. The crime scene appeared to have been dressed, and it was highly unlikely that an outside intruder would have taken the time to do that, with the couple sleeping in the adjacent room. There were 4 people in the home that night, and 2 ended up dead. Why didn't Rajesh and Nupur? The early statement from Rajesh spoke of Hemraj in the past tense, before he was even found dead. The request for any mention of sexual activity or sexual assault to be removed from the autopsy. However, the Talwars' legal counsel said that there was in fact no evidence against the couple. Hemraj could have let an outsider in and then locked the door afterwards. None of Hemraj's blood was found on Rajesh's clothes, and if he was the killer, this would be expected. No DNA evidence was found on anything they suspected to be a murder weapon, and no murder weapon could be confirmed. The router had turned on and off throughout the day, and this didn't prove anything. They had many theories and ideas, but no actual solid motive. No fingerprints or DNA of either Rajesh or Nupur were found on the whiskey bottle. The size of the shoe print found on the terrace was an 8 or 9, while Rajesh's shoe size was 6. There were no eyewitnesses. But with so much evidence either destroyed, contaminated, or not analysed sufficiently, holes in both sides could most definitely be argued. The closure report had to be accepted by the courts. If it was accepted, it meant no charges would be filed against anyone, and the case would be completely closed. In early 2011, Rajesh and Nupur agreed to do an interview to discuss their thoughts, the events so far, and where they thought the case might go.
How come that you heard no noise? Are you both very deep sleepers?
Probably kind of deep sleepers. I mean, I don't know how we didn't hear anything.
What do you think happened?
We really won't like to talk about it right now because we're not really sure about anything.
I think it would be nice if you said, this is what I believe happened.
No, you see, that would mean pointing fingers at people, and I don't want to do that.
No, don't name names.
Don't
name names.
I would rather not say that.
You don't want to build up a sequence yourself.
Absolutely.
Not like this.
Where was your compounder trained? Krishna.
Compounder was trained with me.
What was his full name?
We just called him Krishna. That's it.
This Krishna is somebody that you had a row with 2 days before. And he was in the room of Hemraj, you believe, the night these things happened.
We don't believe it. We've just been told that at one point of time by the CBI. We never suspected it. We never even thought about him. In fact, when Krishna was arrested, he was in the prison.
Why have they picked on you?
It's very difficult for me to answer that. I've done every possible thing, whatever was asked for me by the CBI. It's like saying you're guilty till you're proven innocent, and not the other way around.
We are helpless. We are frustrated. We don't know what to do with ourselves. We don't know what to do with our lives. We want people to support us and help us.
If the CBI had submitted a closure report, they have closed the case. Wouldn't you rather that a case be closed than trouble until trouble troubles you?
Absolutely not. I would never let the case be closed because I know it's not justice for my daughter. And I will not live with it. I will not live with something which I don't want a closure for myself. I just want a closure.
Are you absolutely convinced that it is one of the three servants, that it is Krishna?
Again, I don't think I would like to answer that. It's again pointing fingers
But
at people.
in your heart of hearts, you know that is where your suspicion is.
It could be.
Yes.
Why would he kill your daughter?
I think this is something which is very difficult for me to start talking about. It's not fair. I know it feels like if somebody points fingers at me. So I don't want to do that on anybody. Let the agency, let them get something, let them prove something, and then we'll do
This
that.
is why we're asking for a reinvestigation. Let
This
them
is the
find
reason why
we don't want to make allegations against anyone.
Could
Just
it be
asking for
anyone
justice for
other
Arushi.
than these three who came through Hemraj's room and went to Arushi's room?
Not that we know of.
Supposing, Nupur, you have the CBI director sitting here. What would you ask him to do?
There is a palm print on the terrace.
I've seen that picture.
Yes.
And that should
Which
be a huge,
would possibly
huge
carry
possibility of DNA.
Carry the DNA of the person who was there. Why does the CBI not do that?
And you believe
100%. I believe
if
that
that
very,
is
very,
done,
yes.
if you will be exonerated?
The right culprits would be caught.
The culprits will be caught. Anybody who is not there would be relieved of that.
How does one feel? Because I wonder, I feel
You
the pain for you.
you feel
I mean, you
extremely bad.
feel
I mean, you
that
feel-
here your daughter, whose picture is there behind you, she has been murdered most brutally, and the country, and somehow the atmosphere has been created that the parents are the murderers. How do you feel about it?
I think it's completely breaks you. Whatever, I mean,
You don't look broken.
When there is that's your way of looking at it. I mean,
What
what
we
I am
learn from
inside is not
inside.
something which I can.
How much we sit and cry every night out here. How much we cry every day we come home.
Where was the key? Why was the key lost?
The key was, it was not lost when I was almost dropping off to sleep, and Rajesh told me to go and put on the router in the next room. I kind of woke up from I was almost dozing off. And I did go into Arushi's room, and she was reading a Chetan Bhagat book, in fact. And
she was?
Yeah. And I put on the router, and I said, okay, Arushi, good night, now you go to sleep. And I pulled back the door, and I walked out. Probably the biggest mistake of my life.
Just 2 months after the closure report was filed, a trial court actually rejected it and summoned the couple to explain why they should not be charged with murder, criminal conspiracy, and destruction of evidence. These charges could carry a potential death penalty. Rajesh and Nupur's legal teams approached the Allahabad High Court, but their plea was dismissed. They then approached the Supreme Court. They said that while the promise of bail would be upheld, Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were both expected to appear before the Ghaziabad magistrate to face a trial. The media, who had been out in full force since the beginning, were now in a frenzy, as were members of the public. On his way to one of the court hearings, Rajesh was even attacked with a knife which left his face pouring with blood. The trial, understandably, came with many issues. Because the crime scene had been so contaminated, putting forward a complete case was very difficult for the prosecution, but their theory was this. Rajesh heard noises coming from Arushi's room. He picked up a golf club and ran into her room, where he found Arushi and Hemraj in an objectionable but not compromising position on Arushi's bed. In a fit of rage, Rajesh hit the back of Hemraj's head with the golf club, but when he tried to hit him a second time, Hemraj moved, and Arushi was hit instead. Nupur then came into Arushi's room, but by this point, both of them were nearly dead. They then decided to hide Hemraj's body. They wrapped his body in a bedsheet and dragged him onto the terrace. After this, they slit his throat. They went back into Arushi's room and moved things around the crime scene, before slitting her throat to ensure that the wounds looked similar. They then cleaned the blood on the floor, collected the blood-stained clothes and the sharp-edged weapon in order to dispose of them. They then walked out of the apartment and locked the middle grille door from the outside before entering the house through Hemraj's room to mislead the investigators. A shaken Rajesh then drank from the whiskey bottle. The CBI said the calls going back and forth and the alleged attempts to erase any sexual references from the autopsy report could infer a motive. KK Gautam took the stand and admitted that although he had been asked to change the report, he had refused. Umesh Sharma, Rajesh's driver, was the last known outside person to see Arushi and Hemraj alive and had helped them to clean up Arushi's room after she was found dead. He told the court that he had had Rajesh's car serviced around 3 to 4 months before the murders and kept 2 golf sticks, a wiper and a bucket inside a part of the Talwars Noida flat. He was a key prosecution witness, but was ultimately declared hostile by the court after he refused to identify the golf clubs. He said he was forced to sign statements and stated he had been hit by authorities, resulting in a ruptured eardrum. The CBI and prosecution argued that no outside intruder would have stuck around long enough to drink anything from the whiskey bottle with Rajesh and Nupur just feet away. They would have left very quickly. Although the prosecution's case rested on circumstantial evidence, they felt it was strong enough to gain a conviction, but the Talwars defence team pointed towards the copious amounts of evidence that had either been destroyed or not analysed. No witnesses, no clear DNA, and no concrete motive. The prosecution's circumstantial case was deeply flawed, they argued. The defence still believed that Krishna Thadarai was the one they needed to look at. They said his narco test in which he had mentioned the terrace and cookery was a huge piece of evidence. The bloody whiskey bottle found on the dining table that had not been sufficiently examined was another piece. Why would Rajesh and Nupur leave the whiskey bottle there, covered in blood, they asked. Surely they would have cleaned and concealed this back in the liquor cabinet, which was hidden to almost everyone, including Krishna. They argued he could have committed the murders before drinking from the bottle and then having no choice but to leave it on the table as he didn't know where it belonged. In regards to Hemraj's DNA on the pillowcase, the defence said there was no credible explanation as to how this mix-up could have occurred and, once more, threw into question the entire investigation. The defence was also quick to point out that Hemraj's blood was not found in Arushi's room and there would undoubtedly be some if this is where the attack took place.
There were 4 people in the apartment. One person is dead on the roof, not in the apartment. So in the apartment, there were 4 people slept. One went out, got himself murdered on the roof. Only one person has died inside. The case against Talwars is completely fudged. It has been propelled. It has been manufactured. But your question will not go unanswered. Who killed the 2? There was evidence with CBI. They had DNA evidence against an erstwhile set of accused. Those Nepali helpers, Krishna Thadarai, Vijay Mandal, Rajkumar. But they suddenly dropped it for reasons attributable to them and started implicating Talwars.
We shift our focus to the day's biggest story. Not just the day's biggest story, perhaps viewers, this is a story that has been making headlines for very wrong reasons since the year 2008.
Arushi Talwar's parents, Rajesh Talwar and Nupur Talwar, have been convicted for murder in that case. Still trying to get you more details on what exactly that judgment was. You're seeing pictures from outside the CBI court there, but the news that we can confirm is both have been convicted for murder.
In November 2013, both Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were found guilty of the murders of Arushi and Hemraj. The CBI was seeking the death penalty, but the couple would be sentenced to life in prison. CBI Judge Shyam Lal said, "The parents are the best protector of their own children, and that is the order of human nature. But they have been freaks in the history of mankind, when the father and mother became the killer of their own progeny." Rajesh said, "We will fight till the end for Arushi. I want to ensure her name is cleared. Today, I want to say Arushi was a good girl. Hemraj wasn't bad. You can reverse this statement and it would still hold true." Sources say that while in prison the couple were well respected and spent some time reviving the dental department of the prison hospital, helping to treat thousands of patients, all while refusing any compensation. Still attracting a huge amount of attention, documentary makers, movie makers and authors were following the case carefully. In 2015, the film Talwar premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. Internationally, it was released under the name Guilty and was based on the double murders, showcasing three perspectives to the case. The filmmaker Vishal Bhardwaj and the director Meghna Gulzar researched the case for nearly 2 years before making the film. Another film called Rahasya was released inspired by the case as well. The Talwars legal team had filed an appeal against the guilty verdicts, and in September of 2016, the judges of the Allahabad High Court began hearing the appeal. The Allahabad High Court is the highest court within the state of Uttar Pradesh. The appeal picked apart housemaid Bharti Mandal's statement, in which she claimed on May 16th at 6 a.m. the outermost door appeared to be locked from the outside. They said that the door she was talking about was not actually the door that needed unlocking. Under cross-examination, Bharti said, "I'm stating whatever is being explained to me," which gave the defence more reason to put forward the idea she was repeating what the police had said to her. In a later interview with Bharti, when asked if she had touched and tried to push the door open, she answered no. The doctors who conducted Arushi and Hemraj's post-mortem examinations admitted they had also been influenced by the CBI's theories. The doctor admitted he had never performed an autopsy on a female before.
After almost 4 years in jail, Nupur and Rajesh Talwar finally walked free from Ghaziabad's Dasna jail.
They were acquitted by the Allahabad High Court last week. The dentist couple was swarmed by media crews but didn't say a word. The High Court had ripped apart the CBI and the lower court in its order, where it's clear that the investigation was a complete mockery of justice.
After hearing everything put forward, the court acquitted both Rajesh and Nupur Talwar, saying the evidence against them was unsatisfactory and that the CBI had failed to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. They severely criticised the police, CBI and the media for not having investigated and reported on the murders properly and efficiently.
I'm not going to answer any questions. I've come to give a statement. If it's fine with you, I'll give a statement. If it's not fine, then we can... I'm not going to answer any questions. We are deeply relieved and grateful to God for the verdict which has come out today. It's been an exhausting journey for us, and it's been very trying times for our family. We've suffered a lot in the last almost 10 years now. We are really grateful to the High Court for having acquitted Rajesh and Nupur and brought an end to the injustice which was meted out to them.
While acquitting the couple, the High Court likened the trial judge who found them guilty to a film director trying to thrust coherence into scattered facts. Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were watched by a huge crowd as they left the Dasna prison in Ghaziabad, pausing only briefly so reporters could take some pictures. The couple vowed to come back to the prison every 15 days to continue to help inmates with any dental issues.
Speaking for the first time about what exactly happened and reacting to this judgment now with me, then CBI Director AP Singh. Your closure report said that we think the parents did it, but we don't have evidence, and so we want the case closed. Do you still stand by what you said?
Absolutely, and I think that has been vindicated by the High Court today. Now, in fact, Sunetra, there were 3 teams. It was not 2 teams. There was a UP police team also, which initially took up the investigation. But what all 3 CBI teams ruled out, I mean, not the 2 CBI teams and the UP police ruled out, was any outsider coming into that house and committing these murders. So there were no outsiders involved. Now, the other 2 people who could be involved were either the servants or the parents.
Right.
Now, the first CBI team, based on narco analysis, said that the servants were involved in the murder. But that narco analysis was a very dubious kind of thing, and later on, the lady who did the narco analysis she was, I think, removed from her job in Bangalore.
That's right.
So they were very controversial, the narco analysis, and in any case, narco analysis is not permissible as evidence in court. It can only be an aid to investigation. The second CBI team conclusively proved that the servants had cast iron alibis. Now that left us only with the Talwars. In fact, I was not part of the investigation. I was only part of the decision making at the end.
You took a decision which the other two directors did.
Yeah, because I think they were investigating and the investigations had just been completed when I joined, and I was left to take this decision. And now it was a very important decision. I called both the teams. We had a meeting. We discussed all the evidence. So as I said, servants were ruled out. The outsiders were ruled out. So that only left the Talwars. In a criminal case, it says beyond all reasonable doubt. Now there was a lot of gaps which were not being explained in the investigation.
You knew it was inconclusive. But the CBI, during the course of trial, while in the closure report which was submitted in your term, went in, said that it is inclusive, we don't have evidence. But the CBI actually in court while arguing said the parents did it, and they described it in great detail. They said that Hemraj was in the room and how the golf and how he died because of the golf club and things like that. So that means that the CBI actually, led the court on.
No, I think they were just giving all the facts which were there in our final report.
Right.
We had given a lot of material which showed that it's possible that the Talwars have committed this crime.
Right.
Because there is no other possibility if you rule out outsiders and if you rule out servants.
Right.
This is my personal opinion. I have always stood by my opinion, even in the further meetings, that the parents are not guilty.
A little less than a year later, the CBI challenged the acquittal in the Supreme Court.
Which has now gone in an appeal, and the Supreme Court has today accepted that appeal. It will be a time-consuming process. And remember, criminal trials in the Supreme Court, unless there is a matter of grave urgency, since they are only appellate in nature, do not progress at a great speed. Remember, Supreme Court is a constitutional court.
Hemraj's wife Kamkala was also devastated and approached the Supreme Court saying, "The focus has always been the death of Arushi. No one talks about justice for my husband."
यही चाहते बस सुप्रीम कोर्ट हमारे लिए भलाई करेंगे, इसीलिए हम यहाँ आ गए। देखियो करेंगे तो अच्छी बात है। हम तो यही लग रहा है कहीं केस ना ढीले नहीं पड़ जाए। वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट हमें न्याय दिलाएगी। सीबीआई से हम यही चाहते हैं वो हमारे तरफ से वो फाइल करे, वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में जाके चुप नहीं बैठे, हमारी न्याय दिलाए, उसको सजाए दिलाए।
These challenges would be long processes. Despite the acquittal, many still believe that Rajesh and Nupur were at the centre of what had happened that night, and if the investigation hadn't been so poorly handled, which left room to create doubts, they would have remained in prison. Some feel it was a witch hunt from the get-go, and a trial by media, arguing that the couple were framed and never had a chance to properly defend themselves before the fingers started pointing at them. Others think that the answers and the truth lies with Krishna, Rajkumar and Vijay, or someone else unknown to the police. And others think that the investigation was so badly handled that it's impossible to believe anything about anyone for certain. Which brings us to now, 2022. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. Fizza said Arushi's murder has almost become a folk tale, a story that has been reworded and changed so many times that people have forgotten about Arushi as a person. In a blog post she said, "The night of the murder has been almost written, rewritten, twisted and confused so much that eventually you just believe one version for the sake of convenience." But how were the stories written without a shred of evidence and without questioning logic or legitimacy? There was never any compulsion for me to believe in the culpability of the Talwars or in their innocence. They were not my relatives, not even family friends. Arushi, though, was my best friend, my classmate, my dance partner. I had known her from the age of 5. She was the first friend I had made in school. But I believed in their innocence because I knew what I knew. But I also know that murders are not solved by one's belief. You need hard evidence. You need proof. But that didn't seem to be the case here. I saw things unfold from day one, and I also saw the entire process of the case being handled with complete ineptitude, the media hawking like vultures, contorting facts and information from the very morning and sensationalising the entire incident dangerously. The girl I read about on the news and the parents she had were not real people. They were fictional characters, created out of some collective imagination. One thing is for sure. It seems that this is one of those cases that will forever be hard, if not impossible, to separate fact from fiction and rumours from truth. The same questions still remain. What really happened on May 16th, 2008? Who killed Arushi Talwar and Hemraj Banjad? Why were they killed? And will the case ever reach a conclusion?